Alright, here we go. The name Uwe Boll is synonymous with movie adaptations of video games, and rarely in a good way. I think outside of the Postal movie, most people would agree that this guy hasn't really done these games justice. Starting way back with House of the Dead in 2003 and as recent as 2011 with Blood Rain. Also, one such film that Uwe worked on was the Far Cry movie, based off one of the games responsible for popularizing that open world shooter model that's since pretty much become the norm for, like 90% of video games. And you've kinda gotta wonder how a crazy guy from Europe who once challenged Michael Bay to a boxing match was somehow able to make this film in the first place, considering the prestigious status this series kinda has now. Well, there's actually kind of a simple answer to that. Apparently Boll was able to secure the film rights back when Crytek were in charge around the same time the first game came out, which would explain why he was able to get it made in the first place, and it kind of reminds me of how you hear those stories of people who bought stock in a company like Apple or Microsoft back in the 80s and are now sitting on these investment gold mines.
I'm heading out!
However, instead of Boll really harvesting that gold mine and coming out like an absolute bandit, he instead, didn't.
But George, what about the whales?
Far Cry was a game about an American Special Forces soldier on a tropical island fighting mercenaries and mutant monkeys. So what a perfect idea Boll had to change that to an East German man in Vancouver fighting bald men covered in white makeup. Yeah, that's the premise for Far Cry the movie, and I don't know, we may as well just talk about the whole thing from start to finish. I mean, look, if I had to suffer through it, it's only fair that I share my pain with other people.
Let's not get carried away, please.
Right, so the film opens in a near pitch black forest where someone either forgot to rent enough lights or they just didn't have the exposure set properly on the camera. Bunch of soldiers dressed in black are all attacked by some kind of creature that we never see.
Contact, 10 o'clock!
We're not really told much about what's going on here or what's happening, but it is very clear that these guys are being hunted down. And of course the guy who talks the most shit is the first one to die.
That's all you got!
It's not a terrible opening to a film though, aside from the fact that we can't see diddly squat. You get some pretty cool gore effects, like this one here with this guy's head getting mashed through a fence, which is kinda gnarly. After that, we're introduced to Krieger, one of the main villains from the original Far Cry game, played by the dude from Ace Ventura.
Outstanding.
And it turns out this whole exercise has been some kind of simulation or training, I guess, for a bunch of creatures that he's working on.
Outstanding.
Next up, we finally meet our hero, Jack Carver, once a thick-jawed American with the kind of voice that'd make Duke Nukem proud.
You could have mentioned that back in port.
Now instead portrayed by a German actor named Till Schweiger.
Okay.
And if him being German wasn't a way of Uwe Boll self-inserting himself into the script, well, then I don't know what is. In the movie, he works for a boat charter company taking brain-dead tourists that are so annoying it's almost cliche on whale-watching tours across this lake, which would actually be pretty amazing if he could somehow find whales in fresh water.
But George, what about the whales?
At this point, the only connection to him being the same Jack Carver from the game is the name. The fact that he's got a boat and also that he's wearing a tropical shirt, which doesn't even make all that much sense. Because I think Vancouver is about as far removed from a tropical setting as you can possibly get. Anyway, the whole point of this intro is just to show that Jack's a bit of an asshole who doesn't have much interest in anything.
It could be.
He's just your typical disinterested, directionless protagonist.
Okay.
Back on the secret monster-making facility with Krieger, he starts talking to two of his mercenaries, Jason and Max, and tells them that the whole debacle at the beginning was orchestrated, which is almost completely a pointless scene because we as an audience already know that. So he's just explaining it a second time for the benefit of these characters in the film, which just kind of feels needless. After that, we meet Valerie Cortez, played by actress Emmanuelle Vaugier, who was also in Saw 2. Where she'd absolutely nailed the look of someone who'd trade fellatio for methamphetamines. Valerie somehow managed to get photos emailed to her of what's been happening on the island, and how she's got these photos isn't fully explained at this point, but now she's determined to head there to, I don't know, I guess write an article about it or something?
Because it's too good of a story to pass up.
I don't know, man, it just seems like the kind of thing you might want to notify the authorities about, as opposed to just kind of strolling in and doing your best Lois Lane impersonation. It also turns out that she knows Max personally, but whether or not she's his friend, boyfriend, or dad at this point, we're not told.
You know well enough what I mean.
Meanwhile, Krieger meets up with some military people to show off his experiments, and we finally get to see the result of all of this hard work, which appears to just be these bald, pale-looking soldiers covered in varicose veins. It's kind of a good example of what people start to look like when they turn to veganism. It looks like Sean Patrick Flannery's character from Powder, or kinda like Clancy Brown as the Kurgan at the end of Highlander when he shaves his head.
I am in disguise.
So I'm just gonna call this guy the Kurgan from now on. Now, I know in the original game that Krieger was working on the Trigen, which were largely just based off human DNA mixed with primates, and the only explanation I can come up with this one is that they based this off the mutants from Far Cry Instincts. I mean, they're very similar in appearance with these bald heads, pasty skin, and complete lack of self-control. Turns out too that aside from looking like Death from Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventure, these mutants also have bulletproof skin, which is definitely going to come in handy and totally not a complete safety oversight should one of them go haywire. And oh, would you look at that, one of them's gone haywire. Yeah, it seems all Krieger's really done here is created an out-of-control monster that's immune to gunfire. I mean, that's the greatest scientific breakthrough since the Fleshlight. After this, we see it's been Max who's sending all of these emails to Valerie, which almost comes back to bite him in the ass instantly, as this ghetto Gina Carano discovers what he's doing. Word of advice too, Max, if you're gonna start sending incriminating emails, maybe don't do it with your back to the door. Same thing goes for looking at porn or watching anime. You know what I mean? That way people won't be able to sneak up behind you, which is exactly what happened.
Looking late, Max.
We then get a needlessly graphic surgery scene where Krieger does something to Max, which leaves him looking almost as confused as the audience is at this point.
What are you eating? Junior mints. Camera's working. You want one? No.
Max? Can you hear me?
No, I can't see.
Back in Vancouver, Jack is sleeping off a hangover, I guess, as Valerie rolls into the very untropical looking marina in search of a boat. And despite him very clearly having a cabin, for some reason he chose to sleep on the deck, uncovered and exposed to the elements. But look, there's no time to analyse nonsensical behaviour because suddenly we're on a boat with the both of them as they're en route to the island. And as he cooks the most unappetising looking shish kebabs of all time. Yeah, and I love too how he just keeps randomly turning this wheel back and forth like it actually steers the boat. Just like in the game too, Valerie chose Jack to drop her off on Krieger's Island because of his history. In the game, it's because of his Special Forces training, and in the film, it's a combination of his training and the fact that he also served in the military with Max, who, as we now find out, is Valerie's uncle.
So much for camaraderie between soldiers.
Soon after this, darkness falls across the land with the midnight hour close at hand, and without any effort made at subterfuge, Big Brain Jack shines a goddamn spotlight onto the shore like an absolute idiot, as he and Valerie look for a way onto the island.
Wanna come with me?
No.
Meanwhile, Max, now fitted out with some rollerblading elbow pads and a Halloween costume SWAT vest, rises up like Bub from Day the Dead. Valerie and Jack paddle over to the island, and then Valerie just walks off into the dark with a flashlight. Sure hope she doesn't run into any cougars, bears, wolves, or snakes. Before natural selection can get her though, Krieger's soldiers show up and arrest her. Then they blow up Jack's boat with a goddamn RPG, and you can't fault it for at least keeping things in line with the video game. So, I don't know, give them another point there for video game faithfulness.
No.
After this, Jack's Special Forces training finally kicks in during a fist fight against a couple of soldiers that's barely visible because of how dark the cinematography is. He then decides to try to rescue Valerie by getting into a gunfight with a bunch of Krieger's mercenaries, despite not even really knowing who these people are at this point. I mean, for all he knows, he's on a military outpost or something and he's committing an outright criminal act. Hopping into a jeep, he and Valerie are then pursued by Ghetto Gina Carano, and a pretty lengthy car chase ensues in what's honestly probably one of the better action scenes in the whole film. I mean, you can't fault the amount of work that's gone into this sequence. You get a car flipping onto its side, you get some cool stunt driving, and a dude with the worst aim ever firing a 50 cal machine gun. I mean, it ain't no Raiders of the Lost Ark truck chase, but it is pretty decent considering the caliber of the rest of the movie. Actually kind of laughed in this bit too when Valerie throws a grenade at the truck that's chasing them without pulling the pin, purely at the stupidity of someone not having the common knowledge of how a goddamn grenade works.
They're useless with a pin.
Reminds me of another scene in the underrated masterpiece Surf Ninjas where Rob Schneider throws unlit sticks of dynamite during a jeep chase. Anyway, by sheer blind luck, she also somehow manages to latch onto a nearby chopper with a harpoon gun. which somehow has the effect of causing the chopper to pull their Jeep up into the air, in the kind of physics display that makes the Fast and the Furious movies seem realistic by comparison. After a few more explosions, Valerie and Jack then manage to slip away and head off back into the pitch black tropical jungles of Vancouver, where they then find some kind of abandoned cabin or something, where someone was even nice enough to leave them oil lanterns and a bunch of blankets. Then you get that classic female character undressing scene, where Valerie strips out of her wet clothes and Jack can't help but take a quick side glance. I don't blame him. Somehow too, they don't get found in this cabin, and look, I don't know too much about military tactics, but I would think that if I was looking for two people on the run who are most likely wet, cold, and starving, one of the first places I'd look would be one of the unmanned cabins on the island, that also happens to be stocked up with warm blankets.
That's easy.
They then decide to spoon to keep each other warm, at which point Uwe Boll couldn't resist adding in a quick boner joke.
Is that your gun?
Which ends in the two of them awkwardly kissing and, I don't know, I guess sleeping together. Because if there's one thing that really gets a woman in the mood, it's getting shot at, almost being blown up, along with suffering from borderline hypothermia. Then up next, we get the most savage burn in the entire film.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate me?
2.
A 2.
After this, two of the dumbest soldiers of all time fall for one of the oldest tricks in the book, the good old-fashioned honey trap. And this guy's face here is probably almost the same reaction that most people had to the dialogue in this scene.
Undress.
The fuck is that?
Then, Big Brain Jack has another brilliant plan, driving right into the front gate of an area that's crawling with Krieger's mercenaries. Even though at this point you'd think that like every single soldier on the island would have been briefed and completely aware of these two fugitives that are still running loose. You know those "have you seen this person" posters? Yeah, well what they needed to do was print out like a whole bunch of these and stick them all over the island, as opposed to doing what they did instead, which was nothing.
Any more complaints?
Jack then pretends to take Valerie prisoner to sneak past a bunch of people, which doesn't accomplish anything anyway, as they just move about completely unnoticed. Well, I guess not completely unnoticed. Turns out the spot that Valerie hides in happens to be front and center to a security camera. Yeah, that camera just happens to be aiming at this random bunch of barrels. And that'd be a pretty boring feed for someone to have to monitor all day.
Any more complaints?
Pretty random too, and don't ask me how I caught this, but the soldier watching the security camera is a guy named Peter Kent, who was Arnold Schwarzenegger's stunt double back in the day, along with being that psycho zombie from Reanimator. Anyway, as a result of all of this, Valerie is captured and then bitch slapped by Ghetto Gina Carano, which I'm really hoping is going to be setting up some kind of sloppy cat fight to be happening later. At this point though, we're introduced to the most annoying asshole in the entire film.
Ow! Oh, my back!
A big, fat, loud dickhead that never shuts up and makes you realize that if this guy can get into a movie, anything in life is possible.
Whatever, man. Oh, shit.
His name is Emilio, and he keeps saying that he's the food guy.
I'm the food guy. I'm the food guy!
I don't know if that means that he's a caterer or if he just really likes eating. I'd probably go with the former, but I don't know that many top secret monster labs that outsource their catering to the village idiot.
Forget this.
And of course too, one of the first things he does is stuff his fat face, causing him to instantly choke, but any hope that it might have been the end of this character goes out the window when Jack saves him with the old Heimlich maneuver.
Oh my god, you saved my life! You saved my life!
Max's buddy Jason and the de facto leader of the Mercs shows up, and then Jack and Emilio take off in yet another chase scene, this time on boats. And again, look, if nothing else, it does at least kind of follow the script of the games. I mean, boat chases were common in the first game, so again, another point for video game accuracy. There you go.
Fuck yourself.
There's explosions, there's people getting their shit wrecked. It's just kind of ruined by these cutaways to this big fat asshole every couple of seconds. At one point he even falls off the boat and Jack almost crashes trying to save him. I mean, what a cruel twist of fate that he's got to lug this idiot around. They don't get too far though and are eventually caught and taken to Krieger, and at this point Jack is literally stuck to Emilio, and I think he'd be better off having a human head sewn to his ass.
Well, I think that went quite well, don't you?
Valerie, on the other hand, is taken to meet Krieger directly, where in typical patrician villain form, he puts on some classical music while working on a painting and speaking ambiguously.
You will see him and you will say another word.
And then, for no real reason, he spends the next few minutes giving her the grand tour of his facility, eventually telling both her and Jack the exact details of his plan. All whilst Emilio sits there looking like he has to tell someone that he just pooed his pants. The main point of this scene though is to show Valerie slipping Jack the key to his handcuffs. He also looks completely stunned about it too. I mean, it's amazing he didn't just spit it out or swallow it. But if we're going to be questioning logic at this point, we may as well start pissing in each other's mouths because that makes about as much sense. Almost like clockwork in what's become a pretty by-the-numbers 3-act structure, Krieger then releases newly mutated Max into the holding cells to hopefully kill Jack and Emilio. Jack does the expected thing though and tries to appeal to his humanity, which is a bit cliche but still kind of a sensible approach to seeing his former friend. Krieger then releases a couple more of these mutants, including the Kurgan, which, despite standing still and being comatose for the rest of the film, somehow snap into action at the sight of their holding cells opening. They then start attacking Jack and Max during a scene where 90% of the ass-kicking's done by Max anyway. The Kurgan smashes through a glass window that looks like it's made out of sugar, then hops onto a machine gun, mowing down a couple of soldiers, including Anthony Bourdain, who was, I don't know, just lost on the set that day. Along with shooting out a bunch of windows because, I don't know, I guess the Kurgan's really got a problem with glass on a fundamental level. Then an alarm goes off and that somehow releases the rest of the mutants. And you know what, at this point, I'm really starting to question the logic of this facility's security system. Outside, Krieger's mercenaries are getting their asses kicked by the mutants, which again is another scene in which a character other than Jack is made to look like a complete badass. Jack, still burdened with escorting Emilio, finds his way outside and then starts getting chased by the Kurgan. And we actually get a half-decent little foot chase scene here which shows off some actual athleticism. Why the Kurgan suddenly only has tunnel vision for Jack though, I've got no idea, but for whatever reason, it very clearly wants to catch up to him and beat the shit out of him. But in a move that reminds me of the end of the first Terminator film, Jack cuts the Kurgan in half with a fucking industrial saw. I mean, I've heard of being legless, but this is too far. Meanwhile, Krieger and Valerie are just sitting in his office, looking like what couldn't even be described as mildly concerned about what's going on. As outside, all of these soldiers and mercenaries are still getting their asses kicked. Jack still hasn't learned that these things are kind of bulletproof, so he starts shooting one of them with a shotgun, which again kind of mirrors another scene from Terminator 2 with Sarah and the T-1000. Turns out they're a bit vulnerable to being shot in the face at point-blank range with a shotgun. I mean, it's a strategy so insane, but it just might work.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Jack then runs into Jason, who's had enough of these motherfucking mutants on this motherfucking island. And as they go their separate ways, Ghetto Gina Carano shows up, literally the instant Jack turns the corner, and then slits Jason's throat like a complete psycho. Yeah, there it is. The only character in the film that's arguably had any kind of arc has been murdered horribly in cold blood. Oh, shit. At this point, all hell has broken loose, with gunfights breaking out between the remaining mercenaries and the mutants, with Jack again doing the least of the shooting and the killing. I mean, goddamn son, it's over an hour into this movie and our hero's body count still lingers in single digits. Those are rookie numbers. Kind of hard to tell who's winning and losing at this point, but one thing's for clear, Krieger's getting off the island. Despite heading off in what appeared to be the opposite direction about 2 minutes earlier, Jack then shows up out of nowhere and holds Krieger at gunpoint, and then we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned hostage standoff between him and Valerie.
Let the girl go!
Jack tries a pretty bold strategy here of catching a bullet with his torso, which has proven time and time again to be a very ineffective technique. Thankfully though, someone in the movie manages to be an actual hero because Max shows up yet again to save the day. Even throwing a plank of wood at someone so hard that they do a 180-degree spin in midair. Damn, son. And yeah, this dude is just tearing ass, until he falls for the old bullet to the eyeball trick from Ghetto Gina Carano. But before she can finish him off, he does the most badass thing in the entire movie, twisting her neck like a fucking corkscrew.
Gotcha, bitch!
But sadly also denying us a good old cat fight between Gina and Valerie. Nearby, Krieger finds an empty dock and then just kind of stares at it like an idiot, before turning around to see a bunch of the mutants chasing up to him. But instead of like, I don't know, running or swimming away, he just kind of stands there I guess and lets them kill him. Again though, this is kind of similar to the ending for Far Cry Instincts, but whether or not this was intentional is anyone's guess.
Fuck yourself.
Either way, Jack, Valerie, and Emilio, who somehow survived this whole thing, escape. An indeterminate amount of time later, Jack and Valerie are walking through the marina drinking takeaway coffee, and we learn that Jack has now teamed up with Emilio to continue giving half-assed and disinterested boat tours to tourists.
Hey, Jack!
I think you owe us some whales, Jack.
Yeah, we want to see whales.
But George, what about the whales?
But that's it, we've made it. Through the 90 or so minutes, which when all compiled together in sequential order, is what people refer to as the Far Cry movie. Now I know it's a bit of a meme to hate on Uwe Boll films, and truthfully this isn't a very good movie, but I gotta say though that I do think that 12% Rotten Tomato scores is a little bit rough. I think outside of some of the nighttime scenes where you often can't see anything, it's mostly proficiently made. The action is easy to follow, everything is in focus, it's lit well, we can hear what people are saying and there's no boom mics in shot or anything like that. Well, apart from this one shot here at the end of the film where you can even see the sound guy standing in the boat, and I guess this shot here where Jason's pistol automatically reloads itself in between shots. But to me, a 12% rating symbolizes a movie that is fundamentally bad from start to finish. One that just shows a complete lack of the technique that goes into filmmaking and is just a nonsensical mess with a plot that doesn't come together. And I just don't think that's the case for this movie. The main issue I think is that the plot is so removed from the game at times that if you changed the names of the characters around, you wouldn't know what game it was even based off. Personally, I think Jack should have been the one injected with that monster formula. Getting rid of Max entirely and just making Jason the uncle, kind of merging those two characters together. That's even the basis for Far Cry Instincts. In that game, Jack gets injected with Krieger's serum at the start of the game, and then has these evolving powers for the remainder of it. If you adapt that into the movie, then all of those action scenes with Max you could have given to Jack instead, turning him into the ass-kicking monster. Then you could have a scene where he struggles to hold on to his humanity or something, and Valerie has to pull him back to reality. Ops, there goes gravity. As a result, the way that the script is, our so-called hero, Jack, doesn't even do jack shit. He barely kills anyone and spends more time running away than anything else. When all of the best action scenes in a movie feature a character other than your protagonist, well, it kinda removes their importance and their worth. The setting is also grossly off the mark for a Far Cry game, especially considering the general theme of some of those earlier games, which all took place in tropical settings. Now look, I understand that they probably didn't have the biggest budget to shoot in a more suitable location, but it definitely detracts a lot from the tone it has. And probably the biggest one, no pun intended, is that annoying asshole Emilio should have never been in the script. Having a comic relief character that isn't constantly irritating whenever they're on screen is a tricky thing to do, and it's one that they totally screwed up here.
I'm the food guy!
I'd say that this guy's like the Jar Jar Binks of this film, but I feel like that's an insult to Jar Jar. I just can't imagine what kind of person would laugh at this character, and I feel like his attempts at jokes are an insult to anyone with even a barely existing sense of humor.
They want to see whales.
But I still think that in a universe where things like the Super Mario Brothers and Double Dragon film exists, you can't possibly even dare to say that this is the worst video game movie ever made. Even though sometimes it sure does seem to be trying its hardest to do that.
Ow! Oh, my back!
Fuck yourself.